Captain Marcus Wellington had served the royal family for 15 years. His boots clicked against the marble floors of Kensington Palace as he walked his morning rounds. The early sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the corridors he knew by heart. Marcus was not just any guard. He was Prince George's personal protection officer, chosen for his sharp eyes and quick reflexes. The young prince was now 12 years old, and Marcus had watched him grow from a curious toddler into a thoughtful boy who asked questions that sometimes surprised even the adults around him. This particular morning felt different. Marcus noticed how Prince George sat quietly at breakfast, pushing his scrambled eggs around his plate instead of eating. The boy's usual chatter about his latest book or science project was missing. His parents, Prince William and Princess Catherine, were discussing their busy schedules, but they too seemed to notice their son's unusual silence. Marcus stood at his post near the dining room entrance, his trained eyes scanning for any threats while his ears picked up fragments of conversation. He had learned to read the family's moods over the years. Something was troubling the young prince, and Marcus could sense it like a storm approaching on a clear day. After breakfast, Prince George walked slowly to his study room where his tutors waited. Marcus followed at a respectful distance as he always did. But today, the prince kept glancing back at him with an expression Marcus couldn't quite understand. It wasn't fear or annoyance. It was something deeper, more thoughtful. The morning lessons proceeded normally. Prince George studied mathematics, history, and literature with his private tutors. Marcus remained stationed outside the door, listening to the muffled voices within. He heard the prince answer questions correctly, but his responses lacked the enthusiasm that usually marked his studies. During the lunch break, Prince George asked his tutor if he could have a few minutes alone. This was unusual but not alarming. Marcus watched as the tutor left the room, closing the door behind her. The prince remained inside, and Marcus could hear nothing but silence. Minutes passed. Marcus began to wonder if he should check on the young royal. His training told him to respect privacy, but his instincts told him something important was happening. He remained at his post, torn between duty and concern. When the door finally opened, Prince George emerged with a look of determination that Marcus had never seen before. The boy's eyes met Marcus's, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. In that silent exchange, Marcus felt something shift between them. The prince walked past him without a word, but Marcus noticed a small piece of paper in the boy's hand. It was folded carefully, as if it contained something precious or important. Prince George clutched it tightly as he made his way down the corridor. Marcus followed, maintaining his professional distance, but his curiosity was growing stronger with each step. The prince's behavior was becoming more puzzling by the hour. Years of protecting the royal family had taught Marcus to recognize when something significant was about to happen. The afternoon brought no answers, only more questions. Prince George attended his art lesson, but spent most of the time staring out the window instead of painting. His music lesson was equally distracted. The piano keys seemed to echo his melancholy mood as he played slower, sadder pieces than usual. As evening approached, Marcus noticed that Prince George kept touching the folded paper in his pocket. Whatever was written on it seemed to weigh heavily on the young prince's mind. The boy's shoulders sagged slightly, as if he was carrying a burden too heavy for someone his age. Dinner time arrived, and the royal family gathered once again. Prince George took his seat but remained unusually quiet throughout the meal. His parents asked about his day, and he answered politely but briefly. Marcus could see the concern growing in their eyes as they watched their son push his food around his plate for the second time that day. After dinner, Prince George asked if he could spend some time in the palace library. This request wasn't unusual. The boy loved to read. But tonight, Marcus sensed there was more to it than simple curiosity about books. The prince seemed to be searching for something specific, though Marcus couldn't imagine what. The library was one of Marcus's favorite places in the palace. The tall shelves filled with ancient books and the smell of old leather bindings created an atmosphere of wisdom and peace. Prince George walked directly to a section Marcus had never seen him visit before, the books about royal history and constitutional law. Marcus watched from a distance as the young prince pulled down several heavy volumes and began reading with intense concentration. The boy's finger traced lines of text as he absorbed information that seemed far beyond typical childhood interests. Hours passed, and Prince George remained absorbed in his research. As the palace settled into its evening quiet, Marcus realized that this day had marked the beginning of something significant. The piece of paper in Prince George's pocket, his unusual behavior, and his serious study of royal law all pointed to a decision brewing in the young prince's mind. Standing guard in the library doorway, Marcus felt a strange mixture of pride and apprehension. He had sworn to protect Prince George from physical harm, but he was beginning to suspect that the greatest challenge the boy would face might come from within his own conscience and sense of duty. The clock chimed 10 o'clock, and Prince George finally closed the last book. He sat back in his chair and looked directly at Marcus, that same thoughtful expression crossing his features. In that moment, Marcus knew that tomorrow would bring changes neither of them could have imagined when the day began. The next morning brought gray clouds and a light drizzle that matched the somber mood hanging over Kensington Palace. Marcus arrived for his shift earlier than usual, unable to shake the feeling that something important was about to unfold. His years of military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and every fiber of his being was on alert. Prince George appeared at breakfast looking as if he hadn't slept well. Dark circles shadowed his young eyes, and his usually neat hair was slightly disheveled. He wore his school uniform but moved with the careful precision of someone who had made a difficult decision and was now gathering courage to act upon it. Marcus noticed that the folded piece of paper was no longer in the prince's pocket. Instead, Prince George carried a small leather journal that Marcus had never seen before. The boy kept it close to his chest, protecting it as if it contained state secrets. During the morning lessons, Prince George's behavior became even more unusual. When his history tutor discussed the responsibilities of monarchy, the young prince asked pointed questions about duty, choice, and personal freedom. His inquiries were so mature and thoughtful that even his experienced tutor seemed surprised by their depth. Marcus listened from his post outside the classroom door, growing more concerned with each passing question. Prince George wanted to know about kings and queens who had given up their thrones, about the difference between what people expected and what felt right in one's heart. These were not typical concerns for a 12-year-old boy, even one born into royalty. At lunchtime, Prince George made an unusual request. He asked if he could have a private conversation with Marcus in the palace gardens. This broke protocol in several ways, but the earnest look in the boy's eyes made it impossible for Marcus to refuse. He knew he should inform the senior staff, but something told him this moment was too important to interrupt with bureaucratic procedures. They walked together through the carefully maintained gardens, past roses that bloomed despite the overcast sky and fountains that continued their gentle music, regardless of the heavy thoughts weighing on their minds. Prince George remained silent until they reached a secluded bench near the ancient oak tree that had stood on the palace grounds for over 200 years. The prince sat down and opened his leather journal. Marcus could see pages filled with careful handwriting, sketches, and what appeared to be lists of pros and cons. The boy had clearly spent considerable time organizing his thoughts, approaching his dilemma with the methodical precision that would serve him well as a future king. Prince George looked up at Marcus with eyes that seemed older than his 12 years. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady but filled with emotion that made Marcus's chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. The young prince explained that he had been thinking deeply about his future role as king. He had studied the lives of previous monarchs, understanding both the privileges and the enormous responsibilities that would one day rest on his shoulders. But more importantly, he had been thinking about the people of Britain and what kind of leader they truly needed. Marcus listened in stunned silence as Prince George articulated thoughts that many adults never fully grasped. The boy spoke about feeling the weight of expectations from the moment he could understand what it meant to be third in line to the throne. He talked about watching his grandfather and father carry their royal duties with dignity, but also seeing the personal costs of such a life. The prince's most powerful revelation came when he opened to a specific page in his journal. He had written a letter, not to his parents or grandparents, but to the people of Britain. In simple but profound words, he had expressed his belief that the country deserved a leader who chose their role freely, not someone who inherited it by accident of birth. Marcus felt his world shifting as he realized what Prince George was contemplating. The boy wasn't just having doubts about his future. He was seriously considering stepping away from the line of succession entirely. This wasn't a childish rebellion or a temporary phase. This was a carefully reasoned decision made by someone who understood the magnitude of what he was considering. Prince George explained that he had spent weeks researching historical precedents, studying constitutional law, and trying to understand the legal and practical implications of renouncing his place in the royal succession. He had even looked into the lives of royals from other countries who had chosen different paths, finding examples of princes and princesses who had pursued careers in medicine, education, and public service outside the traditional royal framework. The conversation that followed challenged everything Marcus thought he knew about duty, loyalty, and service. Prince George spoke with wisdom that seemed impossible for someone his age, but Marcus recognized the sincerity and thoughtfulness behind every word. The boy wasn't trying to escape responsibility. He was trying to find a way to serve his country that felt authentic to his own sense of purpose. As they sat beneath the old oak tree, Marcus found himself seeing Prince George not as the royal child he was sworn to protect, but as a young person struggling with one of the most difficult decisions imaginable. The boy was essentially choosing between the life that had been planned for him and the life he felt called to live. Prince George admitted that he hadn't yet spoken to his parents about his feelings. He knew such a conversation would be painful and complicated, involving not just family emotions but constitutional questions that could affect the entire monarchy. He had approached Marcus first because he trusted the guard's judgment and needed someone to help him think through the implications of his choice. Marcus realized that his role was about to change dramatically. He had spent 15 years protecting Prince George from external threats, but now the young prince was asking for help navigating an internal conflict that could reshape the future of the British royal family. The rain began to fall more steadily as they walked back toward the palace. Prince George tucked his journal safely inside his jacket, but Marcus could see that the decision was already forming clearly in the boy's mind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and Marcus knew that his own life was about to become far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The following week passed in a blur of careful planning and secret conversations. Prince George had asked Marcus to help him prepare for the most important discussion of his young life. The guard found himself in an impossible position, torn between his loyalty to the royal family and his growing respect for the prince's thoughtful decision-making process. Marcus had never imagined that his job would involve helping a 12-year-old prince research constitutional law and draft arguments for renouncing his birthright. Yet here he was, spending his off-duty hours in the palace library, helping Prince George understand the complex legal framework that governed royal succession. The young prince's determination never wavered, but Marcus could see the emotional toll the decision was taking. Prince George moved through his daily routines with mechanical precision, attending lessons and fulfilling obligations, while his mind was clearly focused on the conversation he would soon have with his parents. During their secret meetings in the garden, Prince George shared more details about his vision for his future. He wanted to study medicine, to become a doctor who could help people directly rather than through ceremonial duties. He spoke passionately about medical research, about finding cures for diseases that affected ordinary families across Britain and around the world. Marcus found himself deeply moved by the boy's altruistic motivations. Prince George wasn't rejecting his royal heritage out of selfishness or rebellion. Instead, he was choosing a path that he believed would allow him to make a more meaningful contribution to society. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that this decision actually demonstrated the kind of character that would make Prince George an excellent king. The prince had developed a detailed plan for his announcement. He wanted to wait until after his 13th birthday, believing that his age would lend more credibility to his decision. He also wanted to ensure that his younger siblings, Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis, would not be negatively affected by the media attention his choice would inevitably generate. Marcus watched Prince George practice his speech in front of the old oak tree, the boy's voice growing stronger and more confident with each rehearsal. The prince had memorized every word, anticipating possible questions and preparing thoughtful responses. His maturity was both impressive and heartbreaking. The most difficult aspect of the situation was maintaining normalcy around Prince William and Princess Catherine. Marcus could see that they sensed something was different about their eldest son, but they attributed his subdued mood to the normal challenges of adolescence. The guilt of keeping such a monumental secret weighed heavily on Marcus's conscience. During family dinners, Marcus stood at his post and watched the interactions with new understanding. Prince George participated in conversations about school, friends, and upcoming royal events, but Marcus could see the effort it required. The boy was essentially living two lives, his public role as a future king and his private identity as someone preparing to walk away from that destiny. One evening, Princess Catherine approached Marcus with concern in her eyes. She asked if he had noticed any changes in Prince George's behavior, wondering if something at school or among his friends might be troubling him. Marcus felt the weight of her trust and worry, knowing that he possessed information that could either relieve or devastate her maternal concerns. Marcus chose his words carefully, assuring the princess that Prince George seemed to be working through some important personal thoughts, but appeared to be handling them well. It wasn't entirely dishonest, but it felt like a betrayal of the close relationship he had developed with the family over the years. The prince's research had revealed that his decision would require formal documentation and possibly parliamentary approval, depending on how the constitutional experts interpreted the situation. Prince George had even contacted a retired constitutional scholar through encrypted email, seeking anonymous advice about the legal process for renouncing royal succession rights. Marcus was amazed by the prince's thoroughness and intelligence. The boy had considered every angle, from the immediate family impact to the long-term constitutional implications. He had even researched how other monarchies had handled similar situations, finding precedents that could guide the process. As the days passed, Marcus began to understand that his own future was also at stake. Once Prince George made his announcement, the media attention would be intense and prolonged. As the prince's personal protection officer, Marcus would inevitably become part of the story. His role would shift dramatically, and he wasn't sure how the royal household would view his involvement in Prince George's decision-making process. The prince seemed to understand Marcus's predicament and had offered to write a formal letter explaining that the guard had acted appropriately throughout the situation. Prince George was determined to protect everyone who had supported him, even as he prepared to make a choice that would likely create controversy and confusion. During their final planning session before Prince George intended to speak with his parents, the prince asked Marcus a question that revealed the depth of his thoughtfulness. He wanted to know if Marcus believed that choosing one's own path, even when it meant disappointing others, could sometimes be the most courageous thing to do. Marcus looked at the young prince sitting beneath their oak tree, journal in hand, eyes bright with conviction and purpose. In that moment, he realized that Prince George had already answered his own question. The boy's decision to follow his conscience, despite enormous pressure and expectation, demonstrated exactly the kind of moral courage that great leaders possessed. The conversation ended with Prince George setting a date for his family discussion. He had chosen a quiet Sunday afternoon when the family would be together without official obligations or external pressures. The prince wanted privacy and time to explain his feelings without interruption. As they walked back to the palace that evening, Marcus felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. He had witnessed something extraordinary, a young person making one of the most difficult decisions imaginable with wisdom, compassion, and integrity. Whatever happened next, Marcus knew that Prince George's choice would be remembered as a defining moment in British royal history. Sunday afternoon arrived with brilliant sunshine that seemed to mock the gravity of what was about to unfold. Marcus had barely slept the night before, knowing that today would change everything for Prince George and by extension for himself. The palace felt unusually quiet, as if the very walls were holding their breath in anticipation. Prince George appeared at breakfast looking surprisingly calm. He had dressed carefully in a simple sweater and trousers, choosing clothes that made him look like any other 12-year-old boy rather than a future king. Marcus noticed that the prince carried his leather journal, but today it seemed less like a burden and more like a source of strength. The family had planned a relaxed day with no official engagements. Prince William and Princess Catherine were looking forward to spending uninterrupted time with their children, planning to walk through the gardens and perhaps play some games together. They had no idea that their eldest son was about to deliver news that would shake the very foundation of their family's future. Marcus maintained his professional distance throughout the morning, But he could feel the tension building as the chosen moment approached. Prince George had decided to wait until after lunch, when his younger siblings would be occupied with their afternoon activities. He wanted to ensure that Charlotte and Louis wouldn't accidentally overhear a conversation that was meant for his parents alone. During lunch, Prince George participated naturally in the family's casual conversation, asking about his father's recent charity work and listening to his mother describe her upcoming public appearances. Marcus marveled at the boy's composure, knowing the magnitude of what was weighing on his mind. After the meal, Prince George suggested that he and his parents take a walk through the private section of the palace gardens. This wasn't unusual. The family often enjoyed these informal moments together. But Marcus could see the determined set of the prince's shoulders as they stepped outside into the afternoon sunshine. Marcus followed at a respectful distance, his heart pounding with anticipation and worry. He had positioned himself where he could see the family, but couldn't hear their conversation, respecting their privacy while remaining close enough to provide protection if needed. He watched as they walked toward the same oak tree where he and Prince George had held so many secret conversations. The moment arrived when Prince George stopped walking and turned to face his parents. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the boy's hands trembling slightly as he opened his journal and began to speak. Prince William and Princess Catherine's initial expressions of casual attention quickly changed to concern, then confusion, and finally to something approaching shock. Marcus watched the scene unfold like a silent movie, reading emotions and reactions in body language and facial expressions. He saw Princess Catherine reach out to touch her son's arm, saw Prince William lean forward with intense concentration. The conversation continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The prince's voice carried across the garden occasionally, though Marcus couldn't make out specific words. But he could hear the earnestness in Prince George's tone, the careful way he was presenting his arguments and explaining his feelings. The boy was delivering the speech he had practiced so many times, but now it carried the weight of real consequence. Prince William's reaction was initially one of stunned silence. Marcus could see the future king struggling to process what his son was telling him, trying to understand how a 12-year-old had reached such a momentous decision. The prince's father began pacing, running his hands through his hair in a gesture Marcus had seen during other moments of high stress. Princess Catherine's response was more immediately emotional. Marcus watched as she knelt down to her son's eye level, taking his hands in hers and speaking with urgent intensity. Her maternal instincts were clearly at war with her understanding of royal duty and constitutional requirements. The family conference continued for over an hour, with periods of intense discussion, alternating with moments of thoughtful silence. Marcus observed as Prince George remained calm and respectful throughout, never raising his voice or showing signs of typical adolescent defiance. This wasn't a rebellious outburst, it was a carefully reasoned presentation of a life-changing decision. At one point, Prince William stepped away from the conversation entirely, walking to the edge of the garden and staring out at the horizon. Marcus could only imagine the thoughts racing through the future king's mind. Questions about duty, family expectations, constitutional implications, and the practical reality of his son's choice. When Prince William returned to his family, his demeanor had changed. Marcus could see that he was now engaging with Prince George's decision as a serious proposition, rather than a childhood phase to be dismissed. The conversation became more structured, with what appeared to be practical questions about timing, legal requirements, and family considerations. Princess Catherine seemed to be focusing on her son's emotional well-being, asking questions that Marcus imagined related to Prince George's certainty about his choice and his understanding of its irreversible nature. Her posture conveyed both love and profound concern for her child's future happiness. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus began to notice changes in the family dynamic. The initial shock was giving way to a more thoughtful examination of Prince George's proposal. While clearly devastated by the unexpected turn of events, both parents seemed to be recognizing the sincerity and depth of their son's conviction. The conversation ended with a long family embrace that brought tears to Marcus's eyes. Whatever had been decided or discussed, it was clear that the love between parents and child remained strong, despite the challenging circumstances. Prince George's decision had created a crisis, but it hadn't destroyed the family bonds that mattered most. As they walked back toward the palace, Marcus could see that all three family members were emotionally drained, but somehow closer than before. The honesty required for such a conversation had clearly deepened their understanding of each other, even as it complicated their future in ways they were only beginning to comprehend. That evening, Marcus was summoned to a private meeting with Prince William and Princess Catherine. As he walked toward their private study, he realized that his own future was about to be determined. The secret he had helped Prince George keep was no longer secret, and the consequences for everyone involved were about to become very real. The door closed behind him with a finality that seemed to echo through the corridors of the palace. Whatever happened next, Marcus knew that the young prince's courageous choice had already changed everything, and there would be no going back to the way things were before. The private study felt smaller than usual as Marcus stood before Prince William and Princess Catherine. The room was lined with photographs of family moments, royal engagements, and historical memorabilia that suddenly seemed to carry extra weight given the afternoon's revelations. Both parents looked exhausted, their usual composed royal demeanor replaced by the raw emotions of parents facing an unprecedented family crisis. Prince William gestured for Marcus to sit, but his movements were stiff and uncertain. The future king was clearly struggling to process not only his son's decision, but also the realization that his trusted security officer had been involved in the planning process. The silence stretched uncomfortably before Princess Catherine finally spoke, her voice hoarse from the emotional afternoon. She asked Marcus directly about his knowledge of Prince George's intentions, her tone carefully controlled but carrying an undercurrent of hurt and confusion. Marcus had prepared for this moment, but facing the parents who had trusted him with their son's safety made the reality much more difficult than he had anticipated. Marcus chose honesty over self-preservation. He explained how Prince George had approached him gradually, sharing his doubts and concerns in bits and pieces until the full scope of his decision became clear. He described the young prince's thorough research, his careful consideration of all implications, and his genuine desire to serve his country in a different capacity. Prince William's response was measured but clearly pained. He acknowledged that Marcus had been placed in an impossible position, torn between his duty to protect Prince George and his loyalty to the royal family. But the future king also expressed disappointment that such significant developments had been hidden from him and his wife for weeks. The conversation revealed the depth of the crisis facing the family. Prince George's decision wasn't just a personal choice. It had constitutional implications that would require careful navigation. The line of succession would need to be formally adjusted, Parliament might need to be consulted, and the public would eventually need to be informed about a situation without historical precedent in modern British monarchy. Princess Catherine focused on her son's emotional state and future well-being. She shared her fears about Prince George's ability to understand the full consequences of his choice at such a young age. Her maternal instincts were at war with her recognition of her son's unusual maturity and thoughtfulness. Marcus found himself defending Prince George's decision-making process, describing the prince's sophisticated understanding of royal duty and his genuine belief that serving as a doctor would better utilize his talents and passion. He explained how the boy had agonized over the choice, fully aware of the disappointment it would cause but unable to ignore his own sense of calling. The discussion revealed that Prince William and Princess Catherine had spent the afternoon grappling with questions they never expected to face. They had to balance their roles as parents, who wanted their son to be happy with their duties as senior royals responsible for maintaining institutional continuity. Prince William shared his own struggles with royal duty, admitting that he had sometimes questioned the burdens and restrictions of his position. This confession created a moment of unexpected vulnerability that helped Marcus understand the complexity of the family's situation. The future king was simultaneously empathetic to his son's feelings and devastated by the practical implications of his choice. The parents revealed that they had agreed to give Prince George time to consider his decision more fully. They planned to arrange meetings with constitutional experts, family counselors, and perhaps other young royals who had navigated similar questions about duty and personal fulfillment. The decision was too important to be made hastily, even if Prince George felt certain about his choice. Marcus learned that his own position was under review. While Prince William and Princess Catherine acknowledged that he had acted with Prince George's best interests at heart, they needed time to determine how his involvement in the situation affected his role as the prince's protection officer. The trust that had developed over 15 years had been complicated by circumstances none of them could have foreseen. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Princess Catherine asked Marcus for his honest assessment of Prince George's chances for happiness if he were forced to remain in the line of succession against his will. This question revealed the parents' deep love for their son and their recognition that his well-being might ultimately matter more than traditional expectations. Marcus spoke carefully but honestly about what he had observed. Prince George possessed all the qualities that would make him an excellent king: intelligence, compassion, integrity, and a genuine desire to serve others. But Marcus had also seen the boy's passion for medicine and his excitement about the possibility of helping people through direct medical care rather than ceremonial duties. Prince William asked the most difficult question of all: whether Marcus believed Prince George would regret his decision in the future. This forced Marcus to confront his own uncertainties about the situation. While he admired the prince's conviction, he couldn't predict how a 12-year-old boy would feel about his choice as he matured into adulthood. The meeting concluded with no firm decisions about Marcus's future role or the family's response to Prince George's announcement. Both parents needed time to process the situation and consult with advisors who could help them navigate the constitutional and practical challenges ahead. As Marcus left the private study, he felt a profound sense of uncertainty about his own future. His 15-year career with the royal family had been built on trust, discretion, and unwavering loyalty. While he believed he had acted appropriately in supporting Prince George, he understood that others might view his involvement differently. Walking through the palace corridors that had become so familiar over the years, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary events that had unfolded. A 12-year-old boy's conscience had created a constitutional crisis, challenged centuries of tradition, and forced everyone around him to question fundamental assumptions about duty, choice, and service. The next few days would bring meetings with constitutional experts, family discussions about precedent and possibility, and difficult conversations about the future of the monarchy itself. Marcus knew that his own role in these events was far from over, but he was no longer certain what that role would ultimately be. Prince George's courageous choice had set in motion a series of events that would test everyone involved, forcing them to confront questions about tradition, personal freedom, and the evolving nature of royal service in the modern world. 3 weeks had passed since Prince George's revelation, and Kensington Palace buzzed with an undercurrent of tension that even the most junior staff members could sense. Constitutional experts, family advisors, and senior royal household officials had been quietly meeting behind closed doors, trying to navigate unprecedented territory with no clear roadmap to guide them. Marcus continued his duties as Prince George's protection officer, but the dynamic between them had shifted dramatically. Their secret conversations in the garden had been replaced by awkward formality, both of them aware that their relationship was under scrutiny from multiple directions. The easy camaraderie they had developed over the years felt strained by the weight of recent events. Prince George himself seemed to be handling the situation with remarkable composure for someone his age. He attended his lessons, fulfilled his scheduled obligations, and interacted normally with his siblings, but Marcus could see the stress in the boy's eyes, the careful way he measured his words, and the slight tremor in his hands during quiet moments. The palace had brought in Dr. Helena Morrison, a child psychologist who specialized in working with young people facing extraordinary circumstances. Her sessions with Prince George were confidential, but Marcus observed the prince's demeanor after each meeting. The boy seemed relieved to have a neutral adult who could help him process his feelings without the emotional complications of family loyalty or constitutional concerns. Meanwhile, Marcus found himself the subject of an internal investigation led by Sir Richard Pemberton, the palace's head of security. The inquiry wasn't accusatory, but it was thorough, examining every aspect of Marcus's involvement in Prince George's decision-making process. Marcus understood the necessity of the review, but it was still uncomfortable to have his professional judgment questioned. After years of exemplary service, the constitutional experts had delivered their preliminary findings to Prince William and Princess Catherine. Marcus wasn't privy to the details, but he could see the toll the consultations were taking on both parents. They moved through their public duties with professional efficiency, but their private moments were marked by intense discussions and visible stress. King Charles had been informed of the situation, though the details of those conversations remained closely guarded secrets. Marcus noticed increased security around the palace and more frequent visits from senior courtiers, suggesting that the matter was being taken seriously at the highest levels of the royal hierarchy. Prince George's tutors had also been briefed on the situation, though they were asked to maintain strict confidentiality while providing additional support for their student. Marcus observed how they adapted their teaching methods, perhaps unconsciously giving the prince more opportunities to explore topics related to personal choice, historical precedent, and ethical decision-making. The most challenging aspect of the situation was maintaining normal family interactions. Princess Charlotte and Prince Louis remained unaware of their brother's decision, but they clearly sensed that something significant was happening. Marcus watched as Prince George made extra efforts to spend time with his younger siblings, as if he was already preparing for a future where his relationship with them might be fundamentally different. During one particularly difficult week, Marcus was approached by Sarah Thompson, a senior communications advisor who had been brought in to develop contingency plans for various scenarios. She wanted to understand the timeline of Prince George's decision and Marcus's role in supporting him, preparing for the possibility that the story might eventually become public. The conversation with Sarah forced Marcus to confront the broader implications of the situation. If Prince George's decision became public knowledge, the media attention would be intense and potentially harmful to the entire royal family. The communications team was working on strategies to manage the narrative, but everyone involved understood that controlling such a story would be nearly impossible. Marcus learned that several options were being considered for Prince George's future. One possibility involved delaying any formal decision until the prince reached adulthood, allowing him more time to mature and fully understand the consequences of his choice. Another option explored ways to modernize his royal role, perhaps allowing him to pursue medical training while maintaining some connection to the monarchy. The most radical possibility being discussed was actually supporting Prince George's decision while finding ways to minimize its impact on the institution of monarchy. This approach would require careful legal work and unprecedented public communication, but some advisors believed it might ultimately strengthen the royal family by demonstrating their adaptability and respect for individual choice. Marcus found himself caught between admiration for Prince George's courage and concern for the boy's future happiness. The prince had initiated a process that was now beyond his control, involving constitutional lawyers, government officials, and institutional interests that extended far beyond one family's personal dynamics. During a rare private moment, Prince George approached Marcus with a question that revealed his growing understanding of the situation's complexity. The prince wanted to know if Marcus regretted helping him, if the guard felt that supporting the boy's decision had been worth the professional consequences he was now facing. Marcus's response was immediate and heartfelt. He told Prince George that supporting someone's right to make their own life choices, especially when those choices were made with such thoughtfulness and integrity, was never something to regret. He assured the prince that whatever happened to his own career, he remained proud of the boy's courage and conviction. This conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. The formal distance that had developed over the previous weeks began to give way to a deeper understanding, based on mutual respect rather than traditional hierarchy. Marcus realized that his role in Prince George's life was evolving from protector to mentor, from guard to advocate. As the month drew to a close, Marcus received notice that a final decision about his employment status would be made within the week. The investigation into his conduct was complete, and senior palace officials were ready to determine whether his involvement in Prince George's decision-making process was compatible with continued service to the royal family. The uncertainty was emotionally exhausting, but Marcus found comfort in knowing that he had acted according to his conscience and in what he believed were Prince George's best interests. Whatever the outcome, he could live with the choices he had made during one of the most challenging periods of his career. Prince George's decision had created ripple effects that extended far beyond the boy's own future, forcing everyone around him to examine their own values, loyalties, and understanding of duty. The resolution of the crisis would ultimately depend on the royal family's ability to balance tradition with compassion, institutional needs with individual rights, and public expectations with private realities. The morning Marcus had been dreading finally arrived on a crisp autumn day, 6 weeks after Prince George's life-changing revelation. He was summoned to the palace's formal conference room, where Sir Richard Pemberton waited with a thick folder containing the results of the internal investigation. The room felt impossibly formal for a conversation that would determine the future of someone who had dedicated 15 years of his life to royal service. Sir Richard's demeanor was professional, but not unkind as he outlined the investigation's findings. The review had concluded that Marcus had acted within reasonable bounds given the extraordinary circumstances he faced. His decision to support Prince George rather than immediately reporting the boy's intentions was deemed understandable, if not strictly according to protocol. However, the report also noted that Marcus's continued effectiveness as Prince George's protection officer had been compromised by his involvement in such a sensitive family matter. The trust required for his position had been complicated by his role as confidant and advisor in a situation that extended far beyond security concerns. The recommendation was for Marcus to be reassigned to other duties within the royal household, maintaining his employment and security clearance while stepping back from his direct protection role with Prince George. It was a diplomatic solution that recognized both the complexity of the situation and Marcus's years of loyal service. Marcus accepted the decision with mixed emotions. While he was relieved to maintain his career, the prospect of no longer serving as Prince George's primary protector felt like losing a fundamental part of his identity. The relationship that had developed between them over the years had become more meaningful than he had ever expected when he first accepted the assignment. After the meeting with Sir Richard, Marcus was granted a final private conversation with Prince George. They met in the garden where so many of their important discussions had taken place, beneath the oak tree that had witnessed the boy's transformation from curious child to thoughtful young man. Grappling with extraordinary decisions, Prince George greeted Marcus with a maturity that continued to amaze those who knew him well. The boy expressed genuine concern for the impact his decision had on Marcus's career, apologizing for the complications his choice had created for someone who had always supported him. His thoughtfulness and empathy demonstrated exactly the qualities that would have made him an exceptional king. Marcus assured Prince George that no apology was necessary. He explained that supporting someone's right to make authentic life choices was never a mistake, regardless of the professional consequences. The guard told the prince that he was proud to have played a small role in helping him navigate such a difficult decision with integrity and courage. Their conversation revealed that Prince George's situation had also reached a resolution of sorts after extensive consultations with constitutional experts, family counselors, and senior royal advisors. A unique compromise had been developed that respected both the prince's wishes and the monarchy's institutional needs. Prince George would be allowed to pursue his medical interests through specialized education and training, but his formal renunciation of succession rights would be delayed until his 18th birthday. This arrangement gave him the opportunity to explore his passion for medicine while maintaining the possibility of reconsidering his decision as he matured. The plan included provisions for Prince George to spend summers working with medical charities, to attend specialized science programs, and to interact with healthcare professionals who could help him understand the realities of a medical career. If his commitment to medicine remained strong as he approached adulthood, the legal framework for his formal withdrawal from succession would be prepared and ready for implementation. This compromise satisfied multiple constituencies. Prince George felt heard and supported in his aspirations, while the royal family maintained hope that he might ultimately choose to embrace his royal destiny. The arrangement also provided time for Princess Charlotte to mature in her potential role as future heir, should her brother ultimately step aside. Marcus learned that his own situation had influenced the family's decision-making process. Prince William and Princess Catherine had recognized that their son's ability to confide in a trusted adult outside the immediate family, had been crucial to his emotional well-being during a difficult period. They didn't want to discourage such relationships in the future, even if they complicated traditional protocols. The conversation between Marcus and Prince George concluded with mutual expressions of respect and gratitude. The prince thanked Marcus for listening without judgment, for helping him research his options, and for supporting his right to make his own choices. Marcus thanked the prince for trusting him with such an important decision and for demonstrating the kind of moral courage that inspired everyone around him. As they prepared to part ways, Prince George made a request that surprised Marcus. The prince asked if they could continue to meet occasionally, even after Marcus's reassignment, for informal conversations about life, choices, and the challenges of growing up with unusual responsibilities. He valued Marcus's perspective and wanted to maintain their friendship beyond their official relationship. Marcus agreed readily, understanding that their connection had transcended professional boundaries to become something more meaningful and lasting. He realized that while his role as Prince George's protector was ending, his influence as a mentor and friend was just beginning. Walking away from the garden for what might be the last time in his official capacity, Marcus reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. A 12-year-old boy's quiet but powerful choice to follow his conscience had created waves that touched everyone around him, forcing them all to examine their own values and assumptions. Prince George's decision had challenged the monarchy to evolve, had tested family bonds, and had demonstrated that sometimes the most profound acts of service come from choosing one's own path, rather than following predetermined expectations. The boy's courage had created space for authentic conversation about duty, choice, and the nature of meaningful contribution to society. Marcus's career would continue in a different capacity, but he knew that his involvement in Prince George's decision would remain one of the most significant experiences of his professional life. He had witnessed firsthand the power of supporting someone's right to make difficult but authentic choices, even when those choices challenged traditional expectations and created uncomfortable complications. The story was far from over for any of them, but Marcus felt confident that Prince George would continue to make thoughtful, principled decisions as he navigated the unique challenges of his position. The boy's willingness to question expectations and follow his conscience suggested that whatever path he ultimately chose, he would serve others with integrity and purpose. As the palace settled into its evening routines, Marcus prepared for the next chapter of his own service, carrying with him the lessons learned from a young prince whose silent yet powerful choice had changed everything for everyone around him.